Have you ever thought, is this just me when struggling to stay organized, start tasks, or manage time? For those of us over 50, these challenges might not be just aging. They could be ADHD hiding in plain sight for decades. I'm Jami Shapiro, host of Grandma Has ADHD, and I'm building a community where your experiences matter. Whether you're diagnosed, questioning, or simply curious, you're not alone. Our Facebook group is filled with vibrant, understanding people over 50 who share their stories, strategies, and yes, even their struggles, with plenty of laughter along the way. Ready to find your people? Join our growing Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone, because ADHD doesn't have an age limit and neither does understanding yourself better. Together, we're changing the conversation about ADHD after 50. Come be part of the story. Okay, welcome to the latest episode of Grandma Has ADHD. This is going to be the first of its kind, as many of the podcasts that I do are, because we have a special guest today that is not like any other guest I've interviewed, but is similar to my story. Nikki Kinzer is the co-host of Taking Control. She hosts an ADHD podcast, which reaches more than 1 million listeners annually, which is amazing compared to my, brand new podcast. Together with Pete Wright, they've authored Unapologetically ADHD, a step-by-step framework to everyday planning on your own terms, a practical guide that combines Nikki's expertise as an ADHD coach with Pete's personal experience living with ADHD. And just in case you didn't know, I have ADHD. Anyone who's listening has followed this story. And I forgot we had technical problems coming in, so I forgot to pick up the parental. So I just did that. And I keep it real for everybody, Nikki, because
That's right.
this is my reality. So their work focuses on helping individuals with ADHD develop personalized planning systems that work with, not against, our unique brains, addressing everything from time perception challenges to rejection-sensitive dysphoria. Through both their podcast and writing, Nikki and Pete offer a compassionate, practical approach to managing ADHD that balances proven strategies with real-world understanding. So welcome, Nikki. Did that all sound good?
That sounded great. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that Pete wasn't able to make it this afternoon, but you've got me, and hopefully I can answer some questions,
Wonderful.
give some insight.
So it's my understanding that you do not have ADHD, but you got into the world of ADHD through your friend Pete, who does have ADHD. And you shared very briefly what your background was, but then I said stop, because I always like to keep the conversation authentic. So tell me how you ended up in the ADHD space.
Yeah. So Pete and I have been friends for a long time. So we were friends before we ever did any business together. And it was back in 2008, many, many years ago, where I decided I wanted to do professional organizing. I had seen a newspaper article in my local newspaper about this professional organizer. And at the time, I was a stay-at-home mom. And I thought, wow, this might be something that I could do part-time. It would be a really interesting way to help people. And so I happened to call Pete and say, hey, I need a website. And I know you do websites. Do you think you could help me with this? And he said, sure, I can help you. And so he's been a partner of mine since day one, since I first opened the business as an organizer. We started our podcast in 2010, and it was an organizing. So it was Taking Control, the organizing podcast. But then in 2012, I think it was about 2 years later, I decided that I wanted to focus really just on the ADHD community. And that's when I found out he had ADHD. So I really didn't know he had ADHD until I started talking to him about, hey, I want to change the way that our podcast is going to be laid out. And he's like, well, funny that I have ADHD and you're becoming a coach for ADHD. And it just worked out really well. So he comes from the perspective of someone who lives with it. And I'm coming from the perspective of somebody who coaches around it and writes about it and talks about it. And all that
Right.
fun stuff.
So we decide to go from organizing to focusing on ADHD and becoming an ADHD coach.
I think it really came down to a few of my clients at the time. I found that most of them had ADHD already. And there were a couple of clients that I was working with who were both entrepreneurs and they both had ADHD. And I found that I was helping them more than just organizing their space. I was also helping them with their time and catching up on backload their workload that they were behind on. And I just found that I really enjoyed going deeper than just organizing the space, but I also wanted to go on to all aspects of their life around ADHD. And so that was when it started to click that no, this is a community I really want to work with, but I need to learn more about it and I need to learn how to coach for ADHD. And that's when I went back to school and did a bunch of certifications and things like that to learn more about ADHD and coaching. And then just shifted the whole business and then found out several years later that my daughter has ADHD and so does my husband. So I definitely live in a house full of very wonderful, creative minds.
Yeah, I love that's how you describe it, and I'm really happy to hear that you're living with it in your home too, because a
Mhm.
very different experience
Yes.
to real life with ADHD. And even today, when I work from home and I usually will make my breakfast, and I'm even happy when I remember to eat because, when you have ADHD, a lot of times you get sidetracked. I didn't want to stop to clean the pan for my partner. And I know that that's something that really bothers him. So I had to stop what I was doing and think, okay, if I don't clean this pan right now, I will forget it because it's a now and not now. And then that's going to build resentment for my partner. So I am so
Right.
glad to hear that you live with ADHD in
Oh,
your home.
absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of compassion. I mean, because I do understand it that, if the pan had been left out, I understand why. I know it wouldn't be because my partner was intentionally trying to make me mad. Like, I get that, So,
And that's good because a lot of people don't have that
no.
and it does
Yeah,
impact relationships. So
for
my audience is really geared more to people 50 and over who are
I'm in
trying.
that club.
Oh, great. Okay, we can talk online, but into conversation that never been diagnosed, never even suspected that they had ADHD. I actually just met with a client today. I could tell by walking in, oh, something's going on here. And then she started mentioning anxiety and difficulty with decisions. And I'm like,
Mhm.
ding, ding, ding. But, I even said, hey, you think there's a chance you have ADHD? And she said, well, my therapist thought so, but I don't think I have. And I was like, well, you might. So I actually left her a copy of my book, but because
Yeah.
they grew up in a time when it was just the hyperactive little boy, if you sat
Yep.
still, you couldn't possibly have ADHD. And, there's that perception. So my this podcast is really geared to people who are like, oh, you mean this whole time I've had ADHD and all of the emotion that comes with that realization, but also tools. So that is why, because I own a professional organizing company, we both kind of came into it the same way. I would love to hear some of your, big pieces of advice geared specifically towards, people 50 and over who may be decluttering and downsizing and, just all the things we say.
Mhm. Well, gosh, there are so many things that could be going on, right? Especially when you hit that 50 plus. And I think the biggest piece of that is perimenopause and menopause for so many women, right? That when your hormones start to deplete, your ADHD will feel worse and you'll probably feel a little more disorganized, more chaos, more memory loss. I mean, so many different things that could be going on. And so I think that, with your question, I would find out what are the struggles first? Like, is it organizing your home? Are you empty nesting? So now we need to go through bedrooms or things like that. So I would want to know from the client or whoever I was talking to more specifically about where they're finding their troubles. Can you give me something a little bit more specific maybe? And I could talk to that a little bit more.
Okay, so yeah, a lot of people who I work with, so my business is predominantly senior mood management. So a senior
Okay.
has been in their home for many years. They are looking at the process of going into a community. That's a lot of who we work with. They've been in a home for 40 years. They've accumulated their family's belongings. and now they have to make those decisions about what they're going to keep and what they're not going to keep. And it can be overwhelming for anybody, but especially somebody who struggles with making decisions and out of sight, out of mind. So, with that population in mind, what would be your best pieces of advice?
Not to do it alone, to hire a company like you. For sure. I think that would be the biggest thing is I would ask for support because especially if you are living in a house that you've lived in, and you raised your kids in and you've been in this home forever, like there's going to be a lot of stuff in it, right? There's going to be a lot of memories, a lot of things that you've accumulated. And so trying not to do it alone, I would definitely say to get help. And especially with ADHD, because it would be an incredibly overwhelming experience to try to downsize your home and whether you're going into assistant living or a retirement home or if you're going just downsizing into a smaller place, like that's a lot. So I would definitely say ask for help and have somebody help you break that down because it's such a big project. That's where I see folks with ADHD just get so overwhelmed is that they see the whole thing and they don't see pieces of it.
Mhm.
It's really hard to know where to get started. And so that would be my first thing. Have somebody help you process that, walk through like, what is your goal? Are you trying to downsize? Are we going from a 3, 4 bedroom house to a 1 bedroom apartment? Like, what are we doing? And then really try to help them break that down and start, just taking it with chunks. Yeah, I feel like I should ask you that. Like, I should ask you that because that's what you guys do. Like, I don't know, am I on the right page here, or
Oh, I mean,
would you say anything different?
I mean, a little bit different, but I would basically tell somebody absolutely, that first of all, your adult child should never be your downsizing partner. That
Mm,
is just going to be a disaster. I've actually tried it with my own mom and I see
mhm,
it with clients. So, and I would also say it's, a lot of who I've worked with through the years, the ones who didn't know they had ADHD were going through the same process, which is hard for anyone, typical or with ADHD, to go through a lifetime of belongings and feel all the feels and to be overwhelmed by the process. And, it's a museum of your life. And so to first acknowledge that and then, doing it with an ADHD brain is a different process because we can't rely on our memories. And so we want to hold on to so many things because we want to hold on to those memories. I'm finding a lot of it is that, and I know this is the case for me too, as I've become an ADHD coach and understood it, is there's this like Martha Stewart version that we have of ourselves. Like we think if we buy all the craft supplies, or we take the class, that's going to be who we are. And there's a lot of issues with self acceptance. I'm
mhm.
finding the shame that you carry when you have ADHD. And so I think also just being realistic and being gentle with yourself. And the word grace comes up a lot.
Yeah. Well, because the emotional dysregulation in ADHD is so powerful, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest characteristics is that when you feel deep. And so, yeah, if you're going through a lot of things that have a lot of memories, good and bad, that can really stop you in your tracks, right? And not want you to continue because you need to process those feelings. It can be very, very big feelings. And it is an emotional process, not just physically exhausting, but emotionally exhausting. I'm curious though, going back to not recommending your adult child, can you tell me more about that? Because that's the first time I've ever heard that before.
Oh, yeah, and most people in my industry. So just to give you a little bit, I am the board of directors for NASM. Have you heard of NASM before?
No.
Okay, so it's the National Association of Senior and Specialty Move Managers. So we used to be senior move managers where we were basically organizing all of the logistics of someone's move and handling. And every NASM chapter or company that's a part of it runs a little bit differently, but generally guides our clients through the process. So from the floor planning and deciding what's going to fit in the home to making the decisions about, what we're going to keep, what we're not going to keep, and then what we're going to do with everything that we're not going to keep. And then we in our company oversee the movers, but some NASA members actually are the movers as well. But what's really great about us and how I ended up getting into the whole ADHD and organizing space is that when we are unpacking for someone, we are also organizing into their space, which,
Mm.
requires us to group things together and put them in a way that they make sense. And so, in terms of the adult child, this is what I have found. especially when it comes to moving. It's a very stressful process.
Yeah.
And you have an adult child who says, "Mom, you don't need this." And that's a role that an adult child really shouldn't take. If at all possible, we should preserve the relationship because there is that dynamic that gets shifted. And I have a mom with a lot of clutter. I've actually done, podcasts and articles and all of that on the experience of trying to work with my mom, especially before I knew that ADHD was what was going on for both of us.
Yeah.
And so it's just one more battle that doesn't need to be there. But I will say that if an adult child says, "No, I am going to do it," definitely laying down the ground rules before you ever get started. And because this
Mhm.
ADHD audience talking about the sensitivity and how you're going to get a little bit fatigued from all of the decisions, and so making sure that you've got those rules up front before you ever start the process.
Right, right. So you're saying that it's important to preserve the relationship, that it could cause conflict if the child thinks, no, you can let go of this. And the parent is like, no, 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 I need to keep it or whatever their reasoning might be, is
And
that relationship piece. That makes sense.
absolutely, and what I will also share, it's interesting because we as a company will go in and say exactly what the adult child has said, but they will listen to
Yeah.
us because of our authority versus the adult child who is, "No, that's my child, like, you don't know what you're
Yeah.
talking."
It kind of goes both ways too, right? Like I've seen that because I work with college students who have ADHD as well. And
Mhm,
you'll see that if it's coming from a coach, it's very different than if it's coming from mom or dad. And
absolutely.
so, yeah, I can see where that would make a difference. Yeah, that's so great.
Yeah,
You
I mean,
learn something new every day.
so coming into this interview, didn't know what to expect. What would you say is the predominant focus of your book and your podcast in thinking
Yeah.
of?
Yeah, so we definitely don't necessarily like you have a very specific niche, right? Our niche is not as specific. It's adults with ADHD, but not necessarily over 50. It'd be any adult with ADHD and also college students with ADHD as well. Our podcast, we talk a lot about a variety of different things that affect the adults with ADHD. We usually have different topics and themes. We'll talk about money and ADHD. We'll talk about organizing and ADHD, executive functions, where we just, for October awareness, we talked about like getting diagnosed, getting an adult diagnosis, also being an introvert and living with ADHD. So, a lot of different topics. The book itself is based off of planning. And the reason for that is I have a planning membership that I offer. It's called GPS and it stands for Guided Planning Sessions. And it is a monthly membership where a group of us get together 2 days a week on Mondays and Thursdays. On Mondays, we're planning for the week ahead. And then on Thursdays, we're making those adjustments. And so I have a website that's filled with different lessons and articles and things about how to build a planning system when you have ADHD. And then this membership offers the content on how to learn it and how to build your system, but also gives you the ability to do it with support and with a community. And I find that that's really key is not just telling somebody how to do something, but actually giving them the space to do it with others and having that extra support. And that's really what the book is based off of this membership. And then with Pete and I, the way that we incorporated our podcast in the book is we on our show, I'm the ADHD coach expert. He is the one with ADHD. And so a lot of our conversations are around, here are some tools or strategies and him saying, yeah, this is great, but here's where it is, and we're talking to experts and other people that were speaking about different ADHD topics. And so the book was important for us to do together, but in our voices. So when you read the book, there's the process of how to build a planning system, how to choose what tools, calendar, task managers, things like that, what your workflow is when you're using that. But that's in my voice. But then there's these stories that Pete has put into every chapter. And he's such a creative writer that he is able to say, this is the concept that Nikki's talking about, and this is my experience with it in the ADHD lens. And he builds this like wonderful creative story around it. And so it makes the book a lot more interesting than just a how-to, book. And so planning is something that we do talk a lot about on the show, productivity. But I think the biggest thing, our message is that it's not about doing more. It's about doing what matters most to you. It's not about doing more in a minute. Like, we want you to spend the time that you want in that minute doing what matters. So we really focus on your values and what is the biggest priority. Because with ADHD, everything feels like it's on fire. So it's really trying to give you, some tools to go back to and say, okay, if everything feels like it's on fire, how can I really take this to-do list and really honestly do the next three things? It's such a strategy I hear all the time, but how do I do it? So we're giving you some tools to say, well, look at these three things first. And this is how you do that. So it's trying to give them a method, giving them a step-by-step process, but with a lot of flexibility.
That's amazing. And I'm so glad that you talked about the membership component and the accountability. I'm going to take a pause right now, take a sip of water, and have everyone put on pause because I want to go back into that conversation and why that matters. And that's so brilliant. And also wanted to share something that I learned actually through the TED Talks, which were the TED Talks, but called TED Talks. So they're half the length and they're geared towards adults with ADHD on those to-do lists and prioritizing. So we're going to take a pause. And when our listeners come back, they'll get to hear a little bit more about that. Hey there, Grandma Has ADHD listeners. I'm your host, Jami Shapiro, and do I have some exciting news? My book, This Explains So Much, Understanding Undiagnosed ADHD, is now available on Amazon. My mom, Vicki, and I wrote this together. She's the original grandma who inspired this whole journey. I'm calling this the perfect is the enemy of done version, because if I waited until it was perfect, you'd never be holding it in your hands. This book is for us, those of us who've spent our whole lives feeling like we were too much or never quite enough. Inside, you'll find why you've always felt different, ADHD traits you didn't even know were ADHD traits, how to declutter without the shame spiral, and so much more about thriving with ADHD after 50. Here is the exciting part. Everyone who purchases the book gets free access to a virtual book club that my mom and I are hosting. We're going to share stories, laugh about our ADHD moments, and create that safe space where you can finally take off that girdle. When you read the book, you'll know what I mean, and just be yourself. Here's what to do. Head to Amazon, search This Explains So Much, Jami Shapiro, grab your copy, paperback or ebook, and visit grandmahasadhd.com to take the ADHD quiz and get your book club registration link. Understanding your ADHD isn't adding to your plate. It's finally understanding why your plate has always felt so full. I cannot wait to see you at the book club and hear your stories. And if the book resonates, please leave an Amazon review, as well as for this podcast, to help other women find their light bulb moments. Thank you for being part of this community. This book exists because of all of you. Ever wondered why helping a loved one declutter feels like speaking different languages? I did, especially with my mom. It wasn't until I founded Silver Linings Transitions, helping San Diego seniors organize and move for over a decade, that I discovered why. We all experience clutter differently, and for those of us with ADHD, it's a whole other world. If you are listening in the San Diego area and feeling stuck with moving, paperwork, photos, or home organization, our team at Silver Linings Transitions gets it. We understand ADHD's unique challenges, and we won't just help you get organized. We'll create sustainable systems that finally stick. Schedule a consultation with our team today at 760-522-1624. That's 760-522-1624, or find us at silverliningstransitions.com. So we are back with Nikki Kinzer, and it's really funny when we take a pause. There's always a little bit of a conversation in between, and sometimes I don't remember where I left things off, because when you have ADHD, working memory is tough. So it's like someone gives me directions, and then I'm like, I just lost them, and I literally have to, okay, left, right, really concentrate. So I know that I said I wanted to share how we triage the to-do list.
Yes.
And I was going to share something about your planning, your GPS system and membership. So I'm so glad that I remembered both. So I heard on the TED Talk somebody say, and this was really a good visual, when you're thinking of all of the things on your to-do list, that you would think of it as like you were in a hospital and you were triaging. And that was a good way. Like, is this something that's cosmetic, that's elective, that we can put off? Is this triage, like this better get done or the person's going to die, right? Or is this something that we can make an appointment for? So I thought, and I agree. And I actually, with my ADHD education and going through the coaching program, I recognized a lot of patterns in myself where I was overscheduling myself, committing to too many things, not giving myself the buffer for follow-up. So that in my coaching, that's definitely some of the things that I'm pointing out to the people that I coach. So I'm glad that that's something that you guys are tackling. And then I am actually starting a membership program in January as well. First, I'm going to be doing a workshop on Black Friday, and it will be from overwhelmed to come on over, for people who, especially like my mom, for instance, lives with a lot of clutter. She lives in a 55 and over building. She was talking to a neighbor who was an artist, and my mom's like, "Oh, I'd love to see your art." And the woman said, "Oh, you can't come into my house." And that happens a lot. A lot of people, there's so much shame that they keep themselves hidden and they don't accept invitations because they can't invite people over. And so my mom's like, "Oh, I just wrote a book on it. You should see my house." And now my mom is going into this woman's house. But
Right.
your point, that accountability is so important. We do the body doubling. We need the person going through the process with us. And when we understand that this is how we work best, then we're more likely to get something done. And I used to hire an organizer before I knew I had ADHD all the time, but that's not enough if you don't understand why it keeps happening and what you need to do to maintain it.
Right, right. Yeah. That community aspect is so important. And that's what I find to be such a benefit to the folks that are in the membership is that, everybody's at a different space. Planning specifically is it never just goes away. It's not like you just all of a sudden you become an expert in planning and I don't need any help or support anymore. So that's why we try to do it so that it is something that it's not a class, it's not a course that you finish and end. This is an ongoing thing that you're learning about yourself and what works, what tools work best for you. How do you take in the information and how do you process it and how do you use your calendar and what is that triage system?
There was
The man,
you could have been the second one.
because I have talked about that before, and that is a great way of picturing it, is exactly that triage. Like, what is the most important thing? And for us in our book and what we talk about in planning, there's three, and I'll tell you exactly what they are. There's three filters that you can start looking at your list and just start to eliminate the list going from like 100 to at least, 10. And then we can go from 10 to like 5. And the first one is deadline. What are the real deadlines that you have this week that you have to do? That eliminates a lot of stuff right away. And it's an easy decision to make because if something is actually due this week. The second is impact. What is the impact of me getting this task done or not done? The higher the impact, the higher the priority is. The third one is time. When you start looking at your calendar and you start looking at your appointments, how much time do you really have available to get this work done? And that's where the hard questions and the hard decisions start to be made because most likely you don't have the time to do all 10 things. So now I need to make the choice of, do I need to rearrange something to make this work? Or do I need to be okay by saying, I can let this go and focus on the things that have the deadlines and the higher impact. And so that's where I talk about we're not trying to do more in 5 minutes. We're really trying to do the one thing that matters the most. And that's a way that you can kind of start to filter it. So just to give a little takeaway for your listeners, the deadline, impact, and time.
That was such a good way to describe it because I've come to that on my own, but I didn't have it so succinctly described. But to your point, when I'm now looking at my calendar and I think, okay, well, it's going to take me an hour to get somewhere, not to mention the hour or whatever that I'm going to be there, and then the hour to get back, and then the follow up. And so where does that fall in my priorities? So before we leave, I wanted to think two things. One is any message. I always like to have the end user, the end listener in mind. And my podcast is, I believe at this point, one of the only ones that's really geared towards older adults. And again, a lot of them have gone their entire lives not realizing why they felt different. And now they're getting this understanding. And with it comes the grief that they wish they had known and the impact that it would have had on their lives if they had discovered it earlier. So I always like to ask my guests, what would your advice be to those people who are meeting this diagnosis with grief and relief?
Yeah, and it's so true because it can be both, right? I would
Mhm.
say learn as much as you can about it because I think the more you can understand how your ADHD impacts you, the more you can understand that it's not who you are. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. You don't have to do something somebody else's way. You can figure out how to do it your own way. But I do think you find that out by really understanding how ADHD impacts you. So getting that education, that awareness. And then I think it is also grieving because, you have found something out. But then I would say try to let that go too, because the future hasn't been written yet. And
Mm.
just because something has happened in the past or you wish you would have done something different, you still have that opportunity to do something different now. Or maybe it's not even doing anything different. Maybe it's doing the same thing, but with more acceptance and more self compassion and understanding of who you are as a person. I see this with my young adult child who, she's not a child anymore. She's 20, but she was diagnosed with ADHD when she was in 8th grade, and watching her come home and really like beat herself up over something and just trying to hold her with compassion and giving herself that self compassion. How would you treat somebody else? And would you say those things to someone else? If not, then don't be saying them to you because they're not serving you.
Yeah, you nailed it. You absolutely those last couple of words that you've said, and from the future hasn't written itself yet. And by the way,
Mhm.
my old child was diagnosed in 8th grade as well, and that was when I received my diagnosis. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
Simultaneously, when the psychiatrist is asking questions, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm in. Yeah. So it turns out my child is inattentive type. I am combined type. So
Okay. Yeah.
on steroids. Uh, and then my other question for you is if somebody resonated, I'm actually going to look into your GPS because, even people who coach need coaching.
Oh,
Uh,
sure.
can't
Absolutely.
see everything that's right in front of you. I like the analogy that I heard a friend of mine share that, when you got your finger in front of your nose and you can pull it out, you can see your finger, but as soon as you, bring it up to your nose, you can't see it. So,
Right.
yeah. So how can people find you?
Mhm. TakeControlADHD.com is the easiest way to find me. And you can find the podcast there. You can find the book there. We have a blog, all of the coaching services, and the membership program is all there too. So, yeah, TakeControlADHD.com is the best place.
Yeah, it was a great website. I checked it out to
Yeah.
get to your bio. And so, well, thank you, Nikki Kinzer, for being a guest on the Grandma Has ADHD podcast. I'm looking forward to returning the favor and being on your.
Yeah.
We'll be recording this week as well. So,
Thank
thank
you.
thank you, everyone who listened. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like and subscribe to it. Share it. That's how we grow. And if you have not read or heard of the book, This Explains So Much, that is my new book that came out for ADHD Awareness Month. And I've loved the comments from people who are, having those light bulb moments and realizing it all makes sense now. So thank you again, Nikki, for being here. And thank you everyone for listening. And I'm going to just end with Nikki's words. The future hasn't been written yet. I really like that. Thanks so much. The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The hosts, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.